All right, you're good. All right. It is 6 p.m. on Wednesday, August 18th, 2021, and we will call this meeting of the Webster Groves TIF Commission to order. I'd like to remind everybody here on the dais to make sure your microphone has a green light on it. Eric will be handling the Zoom interaction for the TIF Commission members that are dialing in. I'd like to remind you to silence your cell phones. If you have to take a call, please step out of the room. Members on Zoom, you can ask a question or interject. Just raise your hand, and Eric, let me know if you see that. I probably won't be paying attention to the interface. Mayor Welch is here tonight to sit in place for Council Member Franklin as the council liaison for the meeting this evening. So welcome, Mayor Welch. Real quick, before we go to the roll call, Eric, I'm going to kick it over to you to discuss change of TIF Commission appointees.
Absolutely, yeah. So just two notes of items for the members and those on Zoom. Those on Zoom, you will get this email to you shortly. There is an item at the desk for those who are here. It is 2 emails and then a spreadsheet that surmises those emails. That's the record to date of those that have emailed the TIF Commission at webstergroves.org. So that is not part of the official record yet. Those will all go to the public hearing and such record, but we wanted to give you an update at every meeting of what has been received so you can have that for your deliberations. Members on Zoom, again, you will have that this evening for your review. Also, earlier today, the county appointee Stephanie Leon Streeter resigned from the TIF Commission, and the county executive has appointed a replacement who has joined us, Mr. Ray Golick, who is on the meeting. So just for the members of the public and the commission, that replacement has been duly appointed by the county executive and then seated on the commission. So wanted to make that note for you all before we begin the meeting.
All right, thank you, Eric. We'll move on here to the roll call. Fran Sudekamp, would you please take the roll?
I will. Kyle Wilson.
Here.
Ryan Murphy.
Here.
Clark Hoteling.
Here.
Pam Frazier. Here. Mark Hinkle.
Here.
Paul Hample. I don't know if mine is on. Can you hear me, Paul?
Paul, we lost your audio if you were
Yeah.
speaking, but we see you.
Jay Nelson.
Present.
Jacob Trimble.
Here.
Kevin McKenna.
Present.
Mayor Welch. Here. And Eric Peterson.
Did you get Mr. Golick?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Golick. How do I pronounce that, Ray?
Oh, Golick. You said it correctly.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, well, that is a majority of the members, so we have a quorum and we will move on with the meeting. Item number 3 is the approval of the minutes from last week. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from last week? Or does anyone have any corrections to make to the minutes from last week?
Mr. Chair, just a brief staff note. We do have on page 3, Mr. Carney's name is just misspelled, and then my name on page 4. So when we accept the motion, we'll make those Scrivener changes if the commission is acceptable.
Do we need to spell the names or just acknowledge that
We can
there's
just
a
acknowledge.
misspelling that
Yep,
would be
and I've
correct?
got to give to the clerk. So. Take a motion to accept.
Okay. I'm not hearing anybody up here. I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand on the Zoom. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes with the correction of Eric's name on page 2? One was it? Page 1.
Motion
and
to approve the
Mr.
minutes.
Kearney's name on page 3.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second, Hample.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the
Mark
first. Mark? All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And take a vote.
Okay, and then we will take a vote on the minutes.
All in favor. Just a voice.
A voice vote. All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. All opposed to the minutes? I'm hearing none. The minutes are approved. We'll move on to item 4, review and discussion of the proposed Douglas Hill redevelopment project. First up will be Larry Chapman of SG Collaborative to present.
Hope you don't mind if I demask for a minute. A little easier to get through this. Good evening, everyone. I wanted to do a few things by way of update. First, we passed out to each of the members and we made available to the city a letter provided by George Stock and Associates. He's a civil engineer on the project. I'm just simply going to read the letter that he submitted to me and I forwarded to you. So here we go. Dear commission members, I was asked to attend the TIF Commission meeting this evening, but due to conflicts, I cannot. I'm happy to attend at another time. If anyone has any questions, please share them and we'll get them answered. As part of the Douglas Hill development, Stock Associates has prepared a floodplain study titled Douglas Hill Redevelopment Flood Study dated August 19th, 2021. That study has been submitted to the city and MSD and is currently under review. Once approved by both the city and MSD, it will be forwarded to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, for their review and issuance of a CLOMAR. In addition, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will review under their 404 permit process. When completed, it will result in what is called a conditional letter of map revision, the CLOMAR, CLOMR referenced before, and ultimately when the development is completed as planned, an actual revision to the floodplain map, a LOMAR, will be issued. Currently, there are no known stormwater management systems to attenuate the flow of stormwater within the project area. Stormwater is simply uncontrolled. When completed, all the developed area will not only provide stormwater detention for storm events, including the 100-year event, which does not exist today. This will reduce the rate of flow from the project area into Shady Creek, but will also provide water quality, volume reduction, and channel protection to improve the stormwater before being discharged. BMPs or best management practices will reduce the rate of runoff and improve the quality of stormwater discharging into Shady Creek. After studying the site, we determined there's an existing culvert under the bridge bridge under Gore that causes flooding conditions and the likelihood of overland flow, which was witnessed on August 30th. This will occur more frequently with higher water elevation unless it's changed. We are currently reconciling two flood models, one from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and the other from the State Emergency Management Agency, SEMA. Based on these models, upon completion of the Douglas Hill project, including the new culvert under Gore Avenue, we would expect flooding to be lowered by 1 foot during the 15-year storm using FEMA calculations and 2 foot during the 10-year storms using SEMA calculations. In summary, if Douglas Hill is approved and developed as planned, including the new culvert under Gore Avenue, flooding conditions will be improved, but not eliminated, and floodwater elevations can be expected to be 1 to 2 feet less than was experienced on August the 30th. Once the floodplain study has been finalized and approved, we'll share that final data with the city and the remainder of the community. So that's just by way of information for you all. I know we had an exciting event on Monday, and I know it's happened before. One of our goals is to help improve the situation, and that's one of the things that new development can offer. In addition to that, I want to talk about TIF just a little bit. I've been doing real estate development for about 42 years now. I did my first tax increment financing project in 1987, and we've used it very effectively in a lot of communities. It's a economic development tool that's available to cities, not developers, that allows them to accomplish things that otherwise couldn't be accomplished but for the use of the TIF. One of the things this does, and one of the things I know you're concerned about, is the impact on property owners. Well, TIF is a tool that allows us not only to pay for the value of the property or what would be paid to that owner if they simply put a for sale sign in the front yard, but also compensate the owners for inconvenience, relocation, recent improvements that may not have contributed to the value of the property, and generally that make the transaction more comfortable and acceptable. It's actually helpful in these situations. And without a TIF, the likelihood of redevelopment occurring is basically non-existent. You're all here to determine if using a TIF is a good idea. If it is a good idea, then to use TIF, we must find technical blight. We can't use it without it. So let's talk a little bit about what blighting means. In the world of economic development incentives, Blighting isn't a big, ugly, scary word. It really is something that allows tools like TIF to be used. If it's not found, it can't be used. Finding a blight doesn't devalue property. I believe the ability to use TIF and other tools actually improves the property's value because of the buyer's ability to be paid a premium. Blighting does not apply to every single property. It's a generalized concept that applies to the area that we're talking about. Finding blight, in my experience, in many respects, is a box checking exercise. Once you have enough boxes checked, you can comfortably meet the test and decide that blighting applies. While each company, like Development Strategies, has a different set of boxes to check, this matter has been to court on a number of occasions, and there are some of the, and here are some of the things that are to be found. For example, are the buildings 35 years or older, 50 years or older? You can check that box. Is some or all the property in a flood zone? Yes, you can check that box. Do all the buildings meet current code? I doubt it. You can check that box. Are any of the properties in an area showing deterioration or lack of maintenance? I think some of them are, so you can check that box. What about deteriorating parking lots, vacant unimproved land? I think you can check that box too. Are there ADA or Americans with Disability Act violations? There's tons of them. Check that box. Are there building valuations keeping up with the rest of the community? They're not. They're lagging behind. Check that box. There are many other potentially contributing factors like crime, which gratefully is not an issue here, or dangerous traffic conditions, which really isn't an issue. However, you could argue that both Sherman and Lincoln are two public streets that haven't been maintained in decades and basically don't exist. I defy you to go find them except on a map. Anyway, that's what blighting is about here. It's not about saying this guy's property is bad, every property is bad. It's about the general nature of the area and doesn't meet enough of the tests so that you can use this great economic development tool. The other thing that's big and ugly and scary is eminent domain. It's a word that I know makes people jump up and down and have heart attacks, but you know, no one ever wants to actively use eminent domain to force a sale. But if it's not in place, it could actually hurt the ability for these transactions to go forward. Let me give you at least one example and some other ideas. First, if we buy property from someone who's an investor and they want to reinvest their money, without eminent domain being in place, they have to do it under what's called a 1031 exchange. That gives them 180 days to identify the other property and buy it. In real estate, commercial real estate land, that's barely a blink of an eye. If eminent domain is in place, it allows that property owner somewhere between 2 and 3 years to find that other property and buy it. And guess what? The money can be used by them during that period. They defer their gain should they decide to pay the gain for several years. And they now have the flexibility to do what they want and plan properly with plenty of time. If eminent domain's not in the TIF package, that cannot be accomplished. There are other considerations. And I would tell you as a city, if you're going to go to the trouble of all this planning and to decide that a TIF is a good idea, and all of the property owners but one wants the project to go forward, should one property end the development? It's a question you should ask yourself. If you believe the answer is yes, any one property owner should be able to kill the development, then you probably ought not be in the development business. But that's just something that gives you the tool to bring that party to the table to negotiate in a fair way. It's also important to know that the developer doesn't get those rights. I don't get the rights. Those are the rights held by the city, and the city will decide when to use them. Not me. I don't get to say, go do it. The city will decide when to use them if they believe it's appropriate. That's how the tool works. And then again, just to repeat, no one likes to use it. I've had to do it before. It's absolutely positively something of last resort. So in general, I want to say something about TIFs. You know, if you don't use tax increment financing, all you're really doing as a community is forfeiting an economic development tool that gives you the power to do really great things in your community. Projects like this one can never happen without the use of TIF. If you cannot use TIF, you really can't afford to pay the property owners more than what their property is worth if they hung a shingle on the property and put a for sale sign. there are plenty of good reasons to find a blight condition that doesn't hurt anybody personally and doesn't detract from the community at all. It just allows you to use a tool that otherwise you would not be able to use. And a big question for everybody around the table when thinking about this is TIF is what's going to allow you to make this project or allow this project to go forward. Do you want more of the same? Do you want what's been going on there for the last 20, 30, 40 years? Or do you want something new? And that's the real question. So can you find it in your heart and in your mind to find enough boxes to check? I believe Development Strategies already has. I want to make one last point that I've heard. When we applied for this, we let everybody know that the rules had changed in Jefferson City. And good or bad, the legislature saw it in their minds to eliminate the use of TIF in floodplain. And I was quite surprised when I learned this and the law was passed. I reached out to many of these legislators only to find that they really believe the intent of that was to keep you from developing big floodplains like the Missouri River, the Mississippi River, Merrimack River, large flood areas that could be not only dangerous to life and limb, but are really needed as watersheds. When I told them it eliminated the use of this in what amounts to intermittent drainage ditches because it happens to be on a FEMA map, they were all pretty well shocked. I suspect at some point in the future, although like all legislation, it takes years, you might see all this change. But here's the thing, the law is there now and we either use it or we lose it. And we only have until the end of this year to use it. So again, if you believe TIF is a good idea, then we need to be respectful of that. That's all I have for this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions at any time. And I know we've got a great presentation by Development Strategies, which I too am anxious to hear. So has anybody got anything for me?
I'll open it up to the commission for questions. Nobody, anybody on the Zoom wanting to raise their hand?
Not seeing anyone.
No? Okay. Well, I don't think we have any questions right now. We'll move on to.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just briefly,
go ahead.
for the public and those on Zoom, I emailed it. The public will post the letter from Mr. Stock on the TIF Commission website. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. Right now I'll call on Katie Medlin, Justin Carney, and Larry Marks of Development Strategies.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you in person this time. Thank you. I'm Justin Carney. This is Katie Medlin. Larry's joining us virtually today, and we're with Development Strategies, and we've got a presentation tonight. Really, the purpose is to just start a little bit of a deep dive into some of the important documents that you have in front of you and that we've created in reviewing the TIF proposal for Douglas Hill. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about the redevelopment plan. I'm going to talk a little bit about the blight analysis. I'm going to keep those at a really high level. We did present some of the details, some of the pictures, and talked about them in a little bit of detail at the last meeting. So, we'll give an opportunity for a high level overview of that. Again, I'll pause there. Happy to answer any questions that you might have before Katie takes it away on the cost benefit analysis. That's where the numbers and I think the real nitty gritty of tonight's conversation is. So we'll spend the majority of our time kind of detailing that and having some questions and answers around that. So we do have a presentation.
I'm just going to check on Zoom. Zoom folks, can you see it in presentation mode on your side? Yep. All right, good. I will hand you that.
Oh, you want me to go ahead?
You can advance. Yep. So if you go down to the bottom corner, you'll see the little arrows down in the bottom left. There you go.
Excellent.
And Zoom, you can see the advance. We just moved to the next slide. Can you all see that? Okay.
Yes. Great. So as I said, we've just we're going to walk through those three principal documents tonight: the redevelopment plan, the blight analysis, the cost benefit analysis. We do have slides. Mine are pretty brief, and as I said, high level, kind of reminding you all that what we talked about at the last meeting. But certainly, if we want to get into any questions, please just let me know. The redevelopment plan is really the concise, pull it all together document that gives everyone who's interested, kind of a one-stop snapshot of the site as it exists now, a little bit of the history, a little bit of the zoning and what has happened on the site, and then provides a lot of the information around what the redevelopment plan is, what the redevelopment program is for this site. The information then in the redevelopment plan provides a lot of the foundation and the data that goes into the cost benefit analysis that Katie is going to walk us through, as well as really provides the foundation for this community conversation that we're having here with the commission, with the public. Ultimately, if this does continue to move forward and there's a redevelopment agreement between the developer and the city, it sort of starts here because this is that starting point, and then things move on from there. So, at a really high level, as I said, there's history in there. What has been on the site, throughout its history, what is there now? What's the current zoning? What are the things that impact what you see today? And then what's the development program going forward? The map that you see here on the screen is what we call redevelopment project areas. It's showing the entire site, which is just under 19 acres, including all of the right-of-way that's within the TIF boundary. The developer, a developer breaks a project up like this into these redevelopment project areas for a couple of reasons. The first of it is it allows for phasing of the project. It allows the developer to focus on certain aspects of the project. Some of them are site-wide, like grading and utilities and running infrastructure, new roads, and kind of on a site-wide level. But then it also allows the very specific developments to happen at specific times throughout the life of the development. So not only is it phasing from the developer standpoint, it's also phasing and timing from the TIF standpoint. I think we talked about it last time. The TIF is a 23-year sort of financial clock of that's the length of time that the TIF and the development can capture the increment of growth in revenue. That happens on a 23-year time frame. It happens, and there's a different 23-year clock for each one of the RPAs, and that's another reason why the RPAs are important. And so, as you can see here, different sizes. RPA 1 is certainly the largest. The reason you have that being the way that it is that many of the site-wide improvements, as I said, like grading, like any environmental remediation, running utilities, the new roads, anything like that that occurs for the whole development will take place largely as part of RPA 1. I believe Katie's going to get into it a little bit with the cost benefit analysis, so I won't belabor the point, but the costs for those improvements, while the improvements will be happening at the first phase with RPA 1, they will be paid for out of all of the RPAs and kind of waterfalling into that initial outlay for all of those site-wide improvements. So as I said, we can get into that a little bit more in the cost benefit analysis. This is a really important piece of the redevelopment plan, and there's more detail, just more narrative, I guess you could say, around this level of detail. What this does here is this represents the development program. Let's see if there's a little echo maybe going on now, but it represents the development program for each of the RPAs. And what that means is it shows the square footage of the restaurant and retail, the number of apartment units, condos, and townhomes, the square footage of office space that will come online, if you will, for each one of the 3 RPAs. And so I'm not going to read this table to you, but in a high level, you've got about 8,500 square feet of retail and restaurant in RPA 1. You can see over 400 apartment units, for sale, condos, townhomes, another 64 units there. In RPA 2, that's where we introduce the office and almost a little over 117,000 square feet of office space, again with some restaurant and retail and another apartment, 108 apartment units. And then RPA 3, a little bit smaller. You're looking at office and retail around 6,000 square feet there, some more residential units, And, all told, you can see that what that program is. The importance of the development program, and this is, the information that Katie uses to plug into the modeling that says how, the different uses generate different property tax, different sales tax, and so it's really kind of the numbers that are behind the revenue projections that go into the cost benefit analysis.
My apologies, an old slide with an old version of the development program got into this slide deck. So it just affects the retail numbers. So in RPA 1, those numbers are correct. RPA 2, it should be 12,150 for restaurant, 12,150 for retail. And RPA 3 should be 6,875 for restaurant and 6,875 for retail. So we will correct that. My apologies.
Zoom folks, did you catch that? Okay.
Yes.
So we'll get those corrected numbers. Obviously, the corrected numbers are what are in the cost benefit analysis and provide the basis for that. The other thing to note here is I mentioned the phasing and why the phasing is important, and you can see the phasing here for each of the RPAs. As I said, it allows the developer to kind of focus his energies on certain parts of the development, and then that also starts the clock on the TIF for each one. Another aspect of the redevelopment plan is really, working with the developer to understand what their costs are and what the overall costs are to develop the site. And then, it is this information that becomes the basis for, the eligible costs and what is eligible from to be paid for by the TIF. And so there are, there's additional information around this, but as you can see, each of the 3 RPAs, the area-wide improvements really is a lot of that is infrastructure. As I said, it's demolition, it's remediation, it's new utilities, it's the new roadways, it's the pedestrian bridge, all of that that would benefit the entire site. Then you've got things like the building construction, the financing and contingencies that are required by the developer to actually get the project off the ground. Property acquisition is, really kind of a lump sum number. We've just sort of divvied it up here between the RPAs relative to the proportion of buildings that will be on the site. So we just sort of apportioned that, as you can see there. Ultimately, the thing to note is that there's a little over $275 million of cost that goes into getting this development in play. So I can pause there. I can go to the blight analysis. The blight analysis is really just a quick couple of slides. I don't see anybody at the moment. I'll just go ahead and go on. The blight analysis, really, I think Mr. Chapman kind of did a great job summarizing really everything I was going to talk about with regards to these couple of slides. Just a couple of things I think to highlight is, do you have blighting factors on more than 50% of the parcels of the land area that is in the redevelopment area? We think we do. I'll show you a map here in just a second. And then the other aspect to consider when you're considering blight is really, we do look at it on a parcel by parcel basis just to collect the inventory, but ultimately it's looking at all of the different factors collectively for this redevelopment area. And as you're thinking about what does it take for the entire area to be redeveloped, not on a parcel by parcel basis, not on a building by building basis that might exist now, but to collectively look at this entire site as a collective redevelopment area and get this kind of development up off the ground. How does the blighting factors might impact that? So we're looking at the predominance of these conditions, and as it might, the combination of those factors as it possibly retards the provision of housing accommodations or constitutes an economic liability. And I think that's really what you're talking about here is if you don't find blight, if you don't use TIF, do you expect private development to happen but for that? And that's where that but-for statement comes from. If the answer is no, and you think that it's going to continue to retard housing and economic opportunity on the site, that's part of that consideration when you're thinking about blight. So then really, I just wanted to throw up the map here. Katie showed you the map, kind of walked through sort of a parcel by parcel and category by category, really, representation of kind of our analysis of the blighting factors. A few of the things I just want to highlight here. Again, when we're looking at the preponderance and the predominance of this on the entire site, we are looking at things like the areas, the parcels where you have seen property values, assessed values declining from the last 10 years. Property values that are not keeping pace with the increase in property values citywide, and looking at that as a ratio. You can see that there are several parcels that are impacted, that show that condition. Another big kind of obvious factor, I think, when you see it is looking at gravel or deteriorated pavement areas. And again, several of the parking and several of the sites and even just some standalone, pavement areas are gravel. In the middle of your downtown area, they are deteriorated and kind of, again, cumulative impact here. Larry mentioned, and we've documented and kind of looked at the various what appeared to us to be ADA accessibility issues. Also just, some building deterioration in some of the older buildings. And I think the age of the structure is one of the findings, the age of the structures that are on the site. And, the buildings that are 35 years or older. And then even, we looked at the buildings that are 50 years and older, and almost half of the buildings in this redevelopment area are 50 years and older. And, as we're looking at it, there has not been any real significant new construction and development within the redevelopment area for the last 20 to 30 years. So again, we're looking at this collectively, and this, I think, map is kind of representing that collective vision and why it puts a challenge on, the redevelopment of this area without a determination of blight. And I think with that, I'll leave this map up here and pause on the redevelopment plan or the blight analysis before we get into the numbers.
Any questions from anybody?
Mr. Carney, is there a zoning map for this area? And have there been any sort of zoning petitions in the recent past that you all know about that have attempted to redevelop any of these parcels?
One second.
We're gonna look something up here, so we'll get an answer to your question.
Just see, yeah, we do. I question on recent rezoning proposals.
So I think we're going through the process regarding zoning right now.
For this project?
For this
Yes.
project.
So to answer what we were just discussing sidebar, for those on Zoom, the rezoning of the project for this the parcels for this project is underway concurrently with the TIF Commission process here in front of planning and zoning. I'll turn it back to Mr. Carney. It looks like he's found a page.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the redevelopment plan, page 3 and 4 actually denotes the zoning. I don't have it in a PowerPoint right now, so I just have to refer you to the document.
Okay. That's all right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And for those of you, I guess, that don't have it in front of you, I can just tell you that there's 4 different zoning categories. There's the A4 7,500 square foot residential district, industrial, planned multifamily residence, and planned commercial. Those are the existing zoning on the property.
I don't see any other questions on Zoom at this time.
Everyone really wants to get into the numbers. Yeah, look at the nodding heads. All right, Katie, it's all on you.
Good evening. All right, so the cost benefit analysis, I hope everybody's had time to peruse it and kind of dive into it. I know there'll be questions as we go along. Feel free to stop me if something is confusing or if you need some more explanation, you know, it's a lot to go through. I get it. So I just wanted to start with basically the general mechanics of TIF and how that relates to the cost benefit analysis. So tax increment financing is basically a method to redirect new tax revenues generated from the redevelopment project to finance the eligible project costs for a new development. Those taxes are essentially captured by the TIF over time, over the 23-year period that Justin mentioned previously. And those revenues include 100% of eligible new real property taxes and 50% of all new local economic activity taxes, which here is primarily sales tax and utility taxes. So if you look at the chart on the left, this is just kind of an easy way to look at it. So if you look right here, this is your baseline amount. So the assessed value right now for the area would set the baseline for property taxes for the next 23 years if the TIF were to start today. And then over that 23 years, the TIF would capture incremental funds on a year-by-year basis to put towards those eligible costs, while all of the taxing jurisdictions would continue to receive this baseline amount. And then once the TIF expires after that 23-year period, the taxing jurisdictions all begin to receive 100% of the revenues generated by the project. So just moving a little more into the mechanics. So part of, or what the cost benefit analysis does is it's estimating the future revenues that can be generated for each taxing jurisdiction, local, county, all of the special jurisdictions in the region, in both an as-is scenario and then as developed using the proposed development, and essentially comparing the two to see if there's a net positive or a net negative to the taxing jurisdictions over time. So that net impact is essentially what the big numbers reported to all of you and those many tables included in the report. And the other thing the report primarily does is estimate the actual TIF revenues that could be generated by the project. So just essentially diving a little deeper into what those revenues are. So payments in lieu of taxes, or pilots, as we call them, are the incremental real property taxes. 100% of pilots are eligible for capture by TIF. There are a couple of exceptions there. And then economic activity taxes, which we'll refer to as EATs. Those are the incremental taxes generated by retail and utility sales in the area. 50% of those are eligible for capture by TIF. Again, there are some exceptions there as well. All the other tax revenues that typically would flow, the commercial surcharge, personal property taxes, those continue to flow to all of the taxing jurisdictions 100%. None of those revenues are captured by TIF. The developer is also considering instituting a community improvement district with a sales tax of 1%. We've also included estimates of those future SID revenues in the analysis, just so everybody could understand what those numbers look like as well. So diving into the property taxes, I'm not going to go through this on a line-by-line basis, but these are the 2020 real property taxes. I believe the county and the state are getting ready to release 2021. Not sure if they have yet. The TIF, again, will capture 100% of those net new revenues, anything generated beyond that base assessed value. And the exception here is the state and the Productive Living Board. Those revenues continue to flow 100% to those taxing jurisdictions. Otherwise, all net new revenues are captured by the TIF. Moving on, the commercial surcharge tax is $1.70 per $100 of assessed value for commercial properties only. 100% of the revenues generated by the commercial surcharge tax continue to flow to the taxing jurisdictions. The commercial surcharge is a little strange. Only a portion of that $1.70 actually flows to our local taxing jurisdictions, about 33%, but those revenues continue to flow. Where's my mouse? There you are. Personal property taxes, similarly, 100% of those revenues will continue to flow to the taxing jurisdictions. Sales tax. So the TIF will capture 50% of incremental net new sales tax revenues. With sales tax, there are a few more exceptions. The Prop A transportation fund is not TIFable. Children's Service Fund is not eligible for capture by TIF. The Parks and Arch Tax, not captured. Metrolink, Emergency Services, and the state, none of those are captured. Otherwise, all of these taxing jurisdictions in the top part of this chart are eligible for capture by the TIF. And again, that's only 50% of the net new. So those taxing jurisdictions do get some of the new economic activity that's generated. So another thing that we have to look at to kind of establish that baseline is what the base assessed values are right now. The county was still working on fully finalizing 2021 values. So we use 2020. So RPA 1 currently has a full assessed value of 1.6 million. RPA 2 is about 184,000 and RPA 3 is 689,000. So that establishes that baseline scenario for that as developed. Oops. There we go. So to do the new development scenario, we have to make some estimates on what the value of that new development would be. Typically, we look at current assessed values for similar developments in the area, things in Kirkwood, Clayton, Brentwood, et cetera, to see what the assessor is valuing those properties at. So right now we're seeing about $55 a square foot for office, $60 a square foot for restaurant and retail, $31,000 per apartment unit, $75,000 per condo unit, and about $95,000 per townhome unit. Again, the TIF will capture 100% of any of the eligible incremental revenues generated by that, but all the commercial surcharge will continue to flow. For personal property, similarly, we had to make some assumptions as to what the value of personal property would be for this new development. I'm not going to read all the numbers for you, but you can see it there. And those again will continue to flow to the taxing jurisdictions. On the east side, we made some assumptions about the base retail sales in the area. We were unable to procure any information about how much in sales is actually occurring in this area that is actually taxable. So we made some estimates based on the types of businesses that are in the area and probably are somewhat on the conservative side. For the RPA 1, we're assuming $250,000 in sales, RPA 2, $500,000, and RPA 3, $200,000. Similarly, we also made base assessments or estimates, excuse me, for the utility sales in the area as well. Oops, sorry. Sorry, I'm going too far ahead. Okay, so for new sales in the area, we track many TIFs and SIDs in the region and actually are able to pull a lot of data from these developments to understand how restaurants and retail sales are typically going. So using that data, we've assumed $350 a square foot for restaurant sales and $250 a square foot for retail sales. And again, the TIF captures 50% of any of the increment from those new sales. Gross receipts tax, which is utilities. Again, we made some estimates based on typical utility usage patterns in the area. Just want to note that while the TIF is eligible to capture 50% of the increment from utility taxes, we've assumed that all the revenues will continue to flow to the taxing jurisdictions only because utility sales have been notoriously difficult to reallocate essentially to the TIF. So we're just assuming those continue to flow. We also have to make a bunch of other assumptions to build the model. We're assuming that assessments will grow biannually about 3%, which is about average for St. Louis County. We're assuming sales are only going to grow at 2% per year. We're assuming that once the retail and office buildings are occupied, they will be stabilized at about 95%. And then we also include, for the purposes of estimating the total TIF revenues, we include the property tax revenue collection fee of 1.5% and the timely payment and collection fees for sales tax at 3%. So just want to stop there before I get into more numbers. That was a lot. So do we have questions or should I plow on?
Just for the sake of everyone who's at, we've received this question a couple of times. You said it was tough to gather the sales tax generated in the district currently. Is that,
yeah.
Where is that inability to gather that.
I had emailed the finance director of the city and she never gave it to me. So. Yeah. Any other
I've got
questions?
sort of a general question about the schools.
Mhm.
So am I to understand that the schools for the 23-year period will be receiving the baseline property tax,
Right, real property tax.
real property
Right.
tax, but not any of the incremental growth?
Right,
And there will be, per the plan, maybe 40 or 50 new students
Mhm.
coming into the district. So will they be experiencing more expenses and not getting the revenue?
I mean, they will get the baseline of the real property tax, and then they will continue to get 100% of personal property and commercial surcharge tax. The schools do get some of that as well. In terms of financial impacts on the school district, I can't answer that. I don't represent the schools. I know in one of our previous memos, we had discussions, there's capacity there based on the discussions we had, but I can't answer.
I mean, I know there's capacity, but if we're adding more students into the district, there's a cost per student,
Right,
right?
definitely.
And I'm just wondering if they're gonna, for 23 years, be hurt, but I guess that's more for Pam actually
Yeah.
to fill us in on. It's just something that I'm wondering about, all the other
Oh, yeah.
kinds of expenses, the new
I-
fire truck.
I completely understand. I know what we know. I can't answer the financial impact to the school district. That's definitely a question more for them, I think.
Okay, but they will not be receiving any
Unless
increment from the
there's
economic
some
growth.
sort of agreement within the redevelopment agreement that we're not privy to. That's beyond us right now. So
Can I ask a related question? Is that baseline number, is that where we say we are today and what that property is? Throwing off
so
in
it
taxes.
every time when the RPA starts, so for example, RPA 1 is slated to start at the end of 2021 in our model. So that would set the base value at the end of whatever the assessed value is at 2021 for RPA 1, that would be the base. RPAs 2 and 3 are set to start later. So when those are activated, that's what the base is. It's at the time it's activated, what is the assessed value?
Could I ask Larry, I think might have a comment. What I was gonna ask is, do we have things that show the other taxes that will go to the city, the state, et cetera? And how those will impact? Is that sufficient to cover the additional needs as far as emergency services, school demand, library, things like that?
The cost benefit analysis doesn't delve into the immediate fiscal impacts to the city. That's, I think, I don't know who exactly would do that calculation, but we just look at essentially what is the dollar impact to each of those jurisdictions. And then I think it's more on you and other city employees to kind of, run the numbers internally on those individual types of impacts.
I might add, from that municipal services standpoint, I mean, we've had conversations with the larger departments like the police, the fire. I think I talked to Mara and code enforcement. And, and so from that standpoint, recognizing that there might be a need for a new fire truck, for example, or maybe there's not a need for a new officer, or let's revisit what that new officer might be in 5, 7, 10 years once the development's up, if it's catalyzing other activity. Those have been sort of the conversations we've had at the city municipal services level, but it's really that high level. What can we identify right now, like a ladder truck that it is, instead of, doing any sort of kind of city revenue analysis.
And that's included in one of the memos we supplied. I believe it was posted in July to the website as well, if you want to take a look at that.
Would it be a reasonable assumption that as the development moves forward, meaning more and more, residents moving in, more and more people in office spaces over time, that I guess those other revenue streams might open up and increase to the city to help support that further demand on?
I mean, this analysis doesn't take into account any sort of spin-off effect, like people going to other restaurants downtown or shopping at other stores where there isn't a TIF. So, feasibly, there could be some sort of a spillover kind of effect, but this analysis doesn't go into that type of.
And it's not to say that analysis can't happen. It's
It
just
can.
not part of the
It's
TIF
not part of
analysis.
this.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate or potentially, this may not be a question for you, but what's the impact or potential impact that this TIF could have on surrounding properties that are outside of the development zone?
The TIF or the development, I guess is my question back to you, just so I can answer your question correctly.
I guess the total, I guess what I'm saying, I live near the development. So am I going to see a rise in my taxes over the course of the next 23 years to help offset some of the balance that could be associated with the TIF being?
I don't know if I would look at it as offsetting the TIF. I would imagine most likely, and again, we would have to study this, that if the property, if it's a successful development and is driving more people to the area, you would see a rise in property value surrounding it because it's a more desirable area to be. And that your assessment would reflect that because your property value would be going up. I don't think the assessor's office is looking at, and as all of the discussions we've ever had with them, they're not looking to offset TIFs by dinging surrounding property owners. That's not how they work. They're looking at comparable property sales, replacement value, that kind of thing.
If I could add, Mr. Murphy, just to that, our tax rates are coming up for hearing, and the city has had a very steady tax base as we've increased in value. Of course, the reassessments this year have brought up assessed value. The tax rates have fallen consistently year over year. So we're taking in roughly about the same money as allowed by the state under the levy limits, but the rate is falling to meet that. So the net dollar that is being paid in, while it's a little bit more, is not a general massive increase in taxes. So just to give you a sense of how overall assessment and valuation works, we also posted the State Tax Commission pamphlet on assessments on the TIF website. Just understanding a lot of folks don't pay attention to how property taxes are arrived at to help through the education process on this. Thank you.
That's a good question.
So I had a question, and maybe you'll dive into it more as we get deeper in the cost benefit analysis, but it looks like the base valuation, as it appears to me in the chart, is flat, correct, over time. So I mean, as even inflation happens, ultimately that baseline value decreases over time.
It doesn't, the baseline value stays the base, so it doesn't have inflation attached. So I mean, in a way of putting it, it's completely flat. So it is not decreasing, but it is staying flat.
Gotcha. Okay.
So when the baseline, you use that same baseline, but what tax rate do you use?
Whatever the tax rate is for that year. So say, the school district's tax rate goes up in 2023, then that's the tax rate applied. So as tax rates are adjusted, that's whatever it is, but that base assessed value that's used, that remains flat.
Right, so the last several years, most taxing entities, the assessed valuation has gone up and we've had to bring down our tax rate. So if that continues to happen, our tax rate will come down for our amount of revenue that we receive each year then would go down.
Right. And I will mention, for the purposes of this analysis, we assume essentially that all of the property tax rates remain the same over the duration of the 23 years because we can't, forecast how that's going to change year by year. So.
As we talk about words that we don't often use in common day speech, again, the baseline is the baseline assessed value.
Right.
So it is not the tax rate that changes year to year, but assessed value.
Any other?
And one other question, if the development does not provide the increment that's anticipated in the 23-year period, say there's $25 million generated, what happens?
I mean, the city won't be on the hook for it, ideally, depending on the redevelopment agreement, but most likely the city's not on the hook for anything. The developer who has done a lot of upfront work on utilities and infrastructure is out $10 million, essentially. To be clear, Tiff, the city isn't cutting a check for $35 million
Right, I
up
understand.
front. So
But that's a developer on the hook.
Yeah.
Not the city on the hook. for
Right.
that infrastructure.
there's no increment to pay for the work that he's already done, basically. So he's in trouble. Hopefully not, but
Okay, I think we can continue on. Was there anybody, Eric, online?
I don't see anyone on Zoom, but good time to pop in if there is.
okay. All right. So I guess that's a good segue into this. So projected TIF revenues. So based on the model that we have, we're showing total TIF revenues in a present value of $38.4 million. The development team is currently requesting 35 million, and they have the projected cost of almost $276 million. So that's a ratio of 12.7%, which is more or less in line with similar developments across the region. Usually we see between 10 at a high 15%. And then for the SID, we're looking at a total amount of SID revenues, again, over the lifetime of the 3 RPAs in present value of 2.2 million. So any questions there before I move on? Seeing none. Okay, so now we're getting into the fun part. So in lieu of recreating all of the tables and charts that are in the report, I've created these kind of high level tables that look at essentially buckets of revenue. So I'm looking at the city, the school district, St. Louis County, and then the other taxing jurisdictions such as the Zoo Museum District. So looking at RPA 1, which again would start in 2021 and run to 2044, you're looking at a net positive impact to the city of around $800,000, 2.7 million to the schools. St. Louis County would see 2.9 million, and then the other taxing jurisdictions would see nearly 540,000. And then another thing we like to look at is the year after the TIF burns off, that first year where all of the taxing jurisdictions are getting 100% of their revenues again. So this is just an annual amount. So the city, almost $350,000 in year 2045. Schools, 1.4 million. St. Louis County, 683,000. And then the other, other jurisdictions, about 146,000. So, in the report, there is a much more thorough breakdown on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. I don't want to really bore you guys with that, but before I move on to RPAs 2 and 3, do you have questions about that? Or would you like me to move on?
You say other metro jurisdictions, that's just the pool. Is that
It's-
pool money
it's-
going out, or what is?
So the other jurisdictions here, I have the list if my
I've got it right
computer
here.
didn't just shut off.
Katie, I got it.
Thank you.
So the same, if you look to your CBA page 16 is the build out of RPA 1. Metro taxing districts will be the Metro Sewage District, the Zoo Tax, the Metropolitan Zoo Museum District, the Parks Arch Tax, MetroLink Regional Parks, and the Deer Creek Sewer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can just ask, that first column, that's total revenue over the 23 years. I
Right.
just wanted to really be clear, so that when you're comparing that to the other one, that is the first annual 1-year number.
Right.
And so I just wanted to-
And to also be clear, that is the total revenue, just a full gross number. That's not a present value number. So that's just gross, just so everybody's clear on that. So RPA 2, similarly, we're seeing a positive impact to the city, to the schools, to the county, and to the other taxing jurisdictions with the revenues in 2046 when this RPA burns off, around 290,000 for the city, 361-ish thousand for the schools, and county at 793, and 232 for the other taxing jurisdictions. And then RPA 3 is the last one to fully finish out, running from 2024 to 2047. Again, you can see the revenues there, and then the annual revenues starting in 2048 for that RPA. So it's important to remember that as these RPAs burn off, you're going to see kind of like a step up each time one burns off in terms of the revenues that start flowing back to each of the jurisdictions. And then I'm including this table. This is the net new revenues during each of the 3 TIF periods coalesce together. Again, not a present value number, just a gross number to all of the various taxing jurisdictions, just so you have an idea of the magnitude of what that is. And again, these are net new. This doesn't include the base that continues to flow.
So how is that calculated?
So what this is doing, it's essentially, I have essentially 2 models. I have an as-is model with that base value running out 23 years for each RPA. And I calculate all of the property taxes and sales taxes and everything else over that 23-year period as is. And then I have a second version of the model with the new development thrown in and phased in as each building comes online. And then it's totaling each of the taxing jurisdictions for each tax type. And then essentially doing a net of those 2 numbers to get what the net new is. So it's calculating the impact of just the new development and not including the base.
Thank you.
If I can, Katie, real quick,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That is, this table is surmising page 36 in the benefit
Yes.
analysis, which is the.
Thank
sort
you.
of
I was
the
about to
master
scroll
chart.
to that. So that really is the end of my presentation. If anybody wants me to delve into any more nuanced or detailed parts of the analysis, I'm happy to do that. Or if everybody wants to kind of absorb and think about it, that's okay too.
Is it good with you if I take down the share and we put the Zoom
Yeah.
back up?
I think so, unless,
Yeah, I need a mouse.
oh,
Need to be able to. Sure.
You have those numbers cumulative, I mean, the per annual year.
yeah, so if you
I've seen it
look
in
in the appendix, there are multiple tables showing each RPA, the build and no build scenarios for each of the tax types. So property tax, both commercial and residential, personal property, commercial surcharge, et cetera. And so it lays out all of the assumptions essentially of annual revenues projected.
Does that include assumptions of residents and employees working in the district during those
No.
proposed times?
So because unlike St. Louis City, there is no earnings tax here. So we don't really have to calculate how many new residents there would be. It's assuming that a certain number of apartments or townhomes or condos would be built per year and then makes an assumption of when that first assessment would happen. And then does the assessment accordingly. And then in terms of sales tax, we know when the properties will be built, and then we build in a lag to allow for lease up essentially.
What's the projected timeline as far as project completion from the start of the first stage?
So I think, let me go to that. So RPA 1 is scheduled right in my model. The TIF period would start at the end of 21. I believe construction is slated to begin sometime in spring of 22 with completion in 2023. RPA 2 is scheduled to start in 2023 with completion in 2024. And then RPA 4 start in 24, completion in 25. And then there is a more nuanced version built into the model of exactly when things would start to hit essentially.
Thank you.
On that last slide,
Mhm.
the total, it had, I think it was 5.4 million for Webster
Mhm.
Grove School District. But then here on page 36, it's saying 9 million.
Oh.
I don't know if I'm interpreting this wrong or if is that the number that should be matching up or?
No, let me go up.
I think the 9 includes the TIF.
Hold on.
You're gonna want the difference column. This is
Yeah, the third
The
column.
right column, the third column.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
I see here now.
Yeah, so the first column is the build scenario, and then I've essentially netted out that no build to get the increment.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
So then so I'm clear then, on page 35, where it talks about the net gain of $39.6 million. is during the TIF periods, does not include any of those annualized
No,
after TIF
no,
revenue.
that gets a little too confusing to start
Right,
adding in
okay.
the step up.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
I wanted to have that last remark clarified. So we don't build in a 3% or 2% growth rate into the no build scenario, do we?
There's a 3% of growth rate assumed in assessments for personal property, I believe, and commercial not commercial, with commercial surcharge, because no build, the property is assumed to
Right.
stay at the base, but just grow 3% biannually.
But we didn't increase the baseline amount anywhere along the way by a 3%
Yeah,
increase, just for
in-
comparison purposes in the end.
In the build scenario, you mean? Or
In the no build.
in the no build scenario, it assumes that basically what is there now will continue there and will grow 3% biannually in terms
Okay.
of real property assessment.
All right, but not baseline. It's okay, thank you.
Okay, that's okay. I just want to try to make sure I'm answering it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eric, I do see chat and Q&A highlights.
We
down
can, we
there.
can check on it. Yep, we've had them up.
If that's anything that can make
Got
it-
a presenter mode and we have a question from the public. We haven't taken questions from the public, so if we, Mr. Chair, I think we'll take that and have answers developed for it if that works and
Okay.
do that way.
Keep all that for the public hearing.
Okay.
In terms of the 12.7% ratio from the TIF to development,
Mhm.
obviously this is pretty predominantly residential. I mean, is that a typical, I know you mentioned that's typical for TIF, but even for a residential redevelopment?
Yeah, I mean, a
too?
lot of the tips we're seeing especially lately, are residential, partly because residential is easier to find tenants for and develop right now. But typically you're at 10 to 15%.
Okay.
It's just typically how it shakes out. So.
I guess, is there a scenario in here where RPA 1 goes, but RPA 2 and 3 end up in the no build category? Or there's some sort of blend here.
I mean, if RPAs 2 and 3 don't go, if they never start, then the city and all the other taxing jurisdictions would continue to receive whatever they're receiving at the time that those properties, would receive it. If nothing happens there, then if there's no TIF there, then it doesn't impact them.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just to help clarify that point and some of the timeline steps, I'm going to look at Mark and Neil. So TIF Commission comes out, make recommendations, but along the way, RPA 3 is not decided on. What's the city council has some actions to take, correct? When they want to start these pieces of this development. It's not just a one static vote this year or early next year. Correct?
Right, and so the city council has to pass an ordinance to adopt TIF within each redevelopment project area. So if the council adopts TIF within redevelopment project area 1, then that starts the 23-year clock in RPA 1. 2 years later, the council adopts TIF within RPA 2, then that sets the base at that time for RPA 2 and starts the clock for RPA 2. And as was said, if RPA 2 were never to occur, then the taxing districts would continue to get the revenue that they currently get as growth with whatever growth.
So in theory, RPA 2 could get activated in 10 years down the line.
Yeah, so the statutes provide that the outside time is 10 years. So you have to adopt TIF within 10 years now of the initial adoption.
Okay, I just picked a number.
Yeah, good job.
Well, you're the chair.
Kyle, can I suggest you get a lottery ticket on the way home?
So actually that leads to another question I have then about sort of then flexibility. There's a big office component proposed in the development, and certainly there's a lot of discussion happening about where office development goes in the future and a distributed workforce. Does the developer have flexibility to change their proposals for these project phases?
Well, no, I mean, the limited flexibility, how about that? The redevelopment plan describes sets the framework, okay? And so if there are substantive changes outside of that framework, then that would have to come back to the TIF Commission for approval, okay? So the statutes provide that if there's substantial changes to the nature of the redevelopment project, then that would have to come back to the TIF Commission. So you can't, just to take an extreme example, you couldn't propose, an all commercial project and then swap it to all residential without going through the TIF Commission process again. So that's why the redevelopment plan says approximately this to this. And so if there's material deviations from that, there would be an amendment to the plan that with a new public hearing, et cetera.
How does the deadline of the floodplain development affect that? Does that make sense? So let's say they would want to potentially pivot, have to go back to the TIF Commission.
Well, the key is the initial adoption. For RPA 1, the key is the initial adoption. But just because it's adopted, again, there can't be substantial changes to what is actually built beyond what's identified in the plan, because the purpose of this is to let the public and all the taxing districts know, and when you're making a recommendation with respect to the adoption of TIF, here's what is proposed, and here's what we're approving TIF for. So if there's material changes to that, then that's why they can't make material changes without both TIF Commission and City Council approval.
So I do have one more question. We've got a sheet here. This is talking about the impact of density and height.
And I'll just let me preface that. So members on Zoom and for the public, this is on the TIF Commission website. This is the memo on height density I distributed earlier this week. That was provided both to Planning and Development Commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, and also to yourselves. It is publicly available. And so we're prepared to speak to it, or I believe Larry's group was a part of that and Neil was a part of it as well.
So yeah, again, I mean, obviously density and height has been a topic of conversation with this development. It's a concern to me. I know it's a concern to a lot of people, but the numbers in here talks about results of removing 1 floor, results of removing 2 floors. And it has the average land cost per unit before TIF, so on and so forth. But what is it says 36,000 is not feasible, but 30,000 is feasible. What's the threshold for that per unit TIF?
I'm not looking at the exact piece of paper. But the target for us was about 25,000 per unit. And if we remove 1 floor, we've jumped ourselves up to 30,000, which makes it non-feasible. The 25,000 is the feasibility limit. And the only way to overcome that is to have more subsidies somehow. Well, the TIF, as they do in their analysis, can only generate so much economic energy. And so there's not enough additional subsidy to allow you to bring the building floors down or reduce the density. And the compromise would be to get rid of the public streets, to get rid of the parking areas and just make it a big flat giant area. You could recover some of that way. And we showed that example to Neil and councils as was asked. But the reality is we would love to make this easy and just say, well, we'll just reduce it and do it, but it's not economically feasible. So we were asked to show why that's the case, and we did. And we've just simply shared that.
So 25,000, that's the
Yeah,
feasibility.
and yeah, that's where we need to get to make it work in our market. Yeah, today.
Thank you.
And just so we know, the $25,000 wasn't just a figure that was plugged out of or pulled out of the air. That came from development strategies in their assessment of what this would be. So that's why that figure is the target figure.
Mr. Chair, as members think of other questions, I'll just let the public know that we will have a PowerPoint that was presented, posted online as well, and all the other materials from tonight that have been received today. So Mr. Stock's letter and the PowerPoint will all be posted with the meeting materials for the public.
Guess as far as feasibility goes, and I guess just further clarification about what exactly that means. It's part of our role to determine the realistic feasibility, I guess the feasibility of this land being developed without TIF, whether it's with this project or any project in the future. Can you explain maybe a little bit about how moving forward, that's what I'm trying to say is like, what feasibility means? Is it about how much money you can make? Is it about getting financed to actually complete the project, et cetera, et cetera?
It's all of those things. So another item that will be included in the cost benefit analysis, but isn't in there yet, is a pro forma from the developer showing the returns both with and without TIF. So we need to see a reasonable pro forma that we actually look at and make sure is, valid with and without TIF to see where their returns generally would fall. Typically what we see is, infeasible returns without TIF. And then, within a range of feasibility with TIF. The developer is still refining their pro forma right now and working through some of the cost estimates on their end to make sure that what they show us is correct. The other thing that we also receive is essentially letters from lending institutions and other partners that show that there is a willingness to, participate in the project, assuming that TIF is able to occur.
So you as a third party hired by the city is determine the feasibility, not the developer.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have a question then about the developer's pro forma to be provided. I mean, there's been a preliminary pro forma provided to you that this is based on.
Yeah, we've seen some preliminary work, but it was earlier in the summer when construction costs were extremely high. And I know they're working through a big effort right now to work on pricing and just fine tuning everything on their end. So they're working through that and we're excited to see it when it's ready.
Will you be updating your analysis based on that?
Yeah, so it'll be included in the appendice in the cost benefit analysis where it says pro forma to be provided, and a brief description of that as well.
Is there any sort of expectation of when that'll be available, or is that,
Question.
I mean, something we're gonna see with plenty of time before the next meeting?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking for. I mean, part of what you do in our business is you have to, it's not a static business. I can give you a set of numbers on a given day and they're going to change in another day. And in fact, a really super fast project is a year and most of them take many years. And so we can't make our decisions as developers on what's happening exactly on the ground today. If we did that, we would never start a project ever. We just wouldn't. So what we do and what Phil and I have done is we said, we looked at the market, we looked at where we are, and we said, we're going to be long-term owners and holders of this. Even if we have to take a reduced return right now, in the long run, we feel like we'll be comfortable where we're going with this development. And so I'm not going to be able to show you a return that's going to get us 8 or 9%. We're not going to be able to show that to you today because the market doesn't do that. But what I can guarantee you will happen is, because it's happened in the 42 years I've been doing this, is either prices will come down or the market will rise to meet those new prices and the whole market will go up with it. And we're confident of that. And so either the rent assumptions are wrong, the cost assumptions are wrong, some combination thereof, and it'll balance itself out down the road. Yeah, this development is clearly on the skinny side of what most developers do, but we also believe in this market. We believe in the long-term viability of it. And if we were just build it and sell it, we wouldn't be here right now, but we're not. We're doing a very different strategy.
But Larry, the point is, we're working on your pro forma. And so you're going to provide an updated pro forma to the TIF Commission well in advance of the public hearing, so that you all have a chance to look at it and ask them questions
Be happy to
in
do
advance
that.
of the public hearing.
Be happy to do that. I mean, we have updated pro formas every week, so I'm happy to send you one. It's not secret. We've shared every one of them along the way. Yeah, the other thing I would say is somebody said something about, what's going to happen to our values and taxes and things like that. I mean, one of the reasons we do development like this in a lot of communities and communities use vehicles like TIF to do it is because they want to build their community in other ways. So what are the spill-off effects? These folks here can't tell you what the spill-off effects are. So you have to look into your gut and say, what will they be? Well, here's an example. If all of a sudden we have Webster Groves that hasn't had any population growth in, 20 years, and we all of a sudden grow it by 1,500 people, all of a sudden we get a bigger share of the county pool, because guess what? We get our share of the county pool sales tax based on the number of people in our community. So if the number of people goes up, we get a bigger share of that. Well, there's a revenue source that wasn't counted on before. There's all sorts of utility taxes that weren't counted on that help. And some of that is in their analysis and some isn't. When you bring 1,500 people in, 1,200 to 15, which we expect, and they bring their disposable income with us, all of a sudden, all these businesses in town have lots more income, and you start moving the money through, and it raises up the entire economy of the community. And that's why you do these things. It's not all about just this analysis or that analysis. It's about how do you improve the community, and you provide choices so other people who want to stay here can, other people who can't live here now can move here. I mean, that's the reason to use tools like this. If we weren't doing all those things, you shouldn't ought to do it. And that's part of your decision-making process that you'll think through. But I think it's important to think about those things because they do really matter, even though they can't calculate it.
Any other questions from the commission? Any questions from anyone on Zoom?
This is Paul Hample from St. Louis County. Not to jump the gun here, but if a TIF were to be approved, would the city have leverage in terms of ensuring that construction deadlines would be adhered to?
Yeah, Paul, I'll take a crack at it. The redevelopment agreement will have deadlines in it. We also, every redevelopment agreement that I've ever done has deadlines in it and consequences for not meeting those deadlines. We also, negotiate provisions such as, to ensure that during the construction period, as for instance, the taxing districts are held harmless. So we don't want a situation where, assessed valuation goes down because of the timing of construction, and make sure that there's that the taxing districts continue to receive what they're getting now. So I think there's a lot of issues to be negotiated as part of the redevelopment agreement, but the timing is a very important one. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm thinking of an example in the city of Brentwood where the work was done to the high school that dragged on for almost 2 years beyond the promised date, and there was no such stipulation in the contract and no penalty. And the city just had to, and the residents nearby just had to grin and bear it.
I think that's an important issue to be addressed. Right. I agree with you. How about that?
Not hearing anyone else.
I've got one more question for Larry about the letter you read on the stormwater.
Yes, sir.
I know it's hot in the news right now and it's on everybody's mind, but any idea when that finalized plan will be available?
Which plan, sir?
They said once the floodplain study has been finalized and approved, we can share that data with the city and the community.
I'd have to ask George Average. We submitted it. I have to wait for the city and MSD to approve it. Then we have to send it to FEMA and they look at it. Then we send it to the Corps and they look at it. But we aren't going to be able to start the project until that happens. So maybe 4 to 6 months to get to the Clomar stage. And we'll be able to share that information with you. Be about my best guess.
And then is the culvert is that part of the infrastructure of
Yes.
this project, or is that a separate?
It's part of the infrastructure that would be part of the approval of the floodplain plan. And it's in all of our plans.
And so all of those improvements are part of RPA 1.
All of the road and infrastructure improvements are in RPA 1 because they have to be done up front. Yeah. RPA 2 and 3 are nothing more than added buildings to support the development down the road. Yeah.
Okay. Last call for questions. Not hearing any. All right. That concludes item 4, the review and discussion of proposed Douglasville redevelopment project. Moving on to item 5, which is discussion and adoption of the public hearing date and procedures. Eric, your staff recommendations for us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, members on Zoom. This was in your materials packet that was distributed earlier this week. And for those of you here, there's a copy on your desk as well. We did poll the members, and it looks like Wednesday, October 27th is the best available date, given our 45-day need to notify the tax districts by mail of the public hearing. We have the rec center available and will be available for a hybrid public hearing, much like we have tonight, where the public can address you both in person or from the beauty of Zoom. The members can be on Zoom as well. This has worked well. We did it last night with planning and zoning. And so we'd be able to accommodate that. Just a couple notes on the recommendations. If you look at the front page, we do have the TIF Commission email for people to submit comments. Given the timeline of this process, the fact that we have a long period between now and the hearing, it is my recommendation that we do not disqualify a person from speaking at the hearing, even if they've sent us submitted comments. So paperwork, the city is not going to read all these comments that will come to the public hearing. You will have them all provided to you. But if they have sent in a packet, they can still come and address the council, or excuse me, the commission. I'm recommending, as we talked about at the last meeting, 3 minutes as the sort of notice what we're going to give out for everyone to speak. Obviously, I would encourage the commission to remind them to reserve the right to change that depending on the volume and the repetitive nature sometimes of hearings and such. So just good judgment for us to do that. And then as well, I do want to point out that there is obviously much community interest, and the city would also extend direct invitations to the affected district and surrounding business owners in the Old Webster Business District to make sure that everyone is aware of their opportunity to address the TIF Commission on this matter. So those are our recommendations. You can see this here. This is meant to be sort of I don't want to say rules, but a way to help us guide notice and informing the public of how this will work should you set the date. So happy to talk about all these items and actions, but the ultimate goal at the end of this, and Mark and Neil can correct me if there's any problem with this, is to set the date hopefully for Wednesday, October 27th at 6 p.m. at the rec center and via teleconference. And I'll turn it to them to make sure I haven't missed anything in terms of the public hearing. All right. And then, Mr. Chair, before we dive into that, just a background on the back page, I left the optional dates on for meetings, including another meeting in September and one on October 6th. So this is as you think about this tonight, we'll need to know if we need to schedule another meeting. If you want to hear, see the pro forma that was mentioned, talk about, digest these numbers that you've heard and have some rebound questions and such before the hearing and meet again, we certainly can schedule any of those optional meetings. If the hearing does need to go to a second night, I want to be very clear for you and the public. The hearing is one hearing. It is a continued hearing, meaning if we go to November 10th, it is the same hearing, just sort of in its second session. On November 10th is the date we are holding, given the calendars for folks between Tuesdays and Thursdays. Thursdays, and Mondays are just days that don't work for most of the TIF Commission. So Wednesdays is our day. So those are the dates we're holding. Again, optionals depending on what the commission may decide. But I do want to point that out for the public. It's not two chances to come up to the podium. It's the same hearing to appear at, just to make sure. It's a matter of making sure everyone can get in if we have to extend to a second night.
So then what we're going to discuss here then is not only the date, time, venue, but you have then the other procedures. So do we need included in that motion would be minutes, how long people could speak? What all are we eventually motioning here?
I think you need to set the date and such. We just need direction in the notice to be sure to tell the public, this general rule about if you can submit comments, you can still appear, that's, fine. Those are things that we just need the direction on.
Okay.
Your action is to set the date and the time and the location of the hearing.
Got it. Okay, well, I'll open it up for discussion right now. Just kind of the big question, is there anyone who thinks that we need to hold one of the optional meetings interim to the public hearing? I'm not hearing anyone, and I do not, I don't have any recommendation for that either. Is there any other procedural things we need to discuss then, or just motion, can I get a motion to?
The only thing I will add is just briefly, and I forgot to mention this, we anticipate that you will not want to take an action on the same night as the hearing. So it is likely that that November 10th date would be held for an actual business meeting of the commission to then move on recommendations. But that is only our staff anticipation of your desires. The commission may tell us that no, agenda us to be ready for work. So.
Okay. All right, understood. Can I get a motion for the next TIF Commission meeting and first and only public hearing on Wednesday, October 27th at 6 p.m. at the Webster Groves Rec Center?
So moved.
Who was that?
Seconded.
That was Kevin McKenna.
Thank you.
Do we have a second?
Second, Andrea Nelson Roberts.
Do I need to take a roll call vote for this or no, just a voice vote? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? I'm hearing none. The motion passes. The next public hearing will be Wednesday, October 27th at 6 p.m.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I would just note, just for the staff and whomever, that I think that these proposed rules or protocols surrounding the public hearing take into consideration people of all different disabilities and access to technology and such. So I think that we should strongly consider implementing these at that hearing. I just wanted to note that again for the staff's benefit. I think this looks really good, so I appreciate their work putting that together.
Thank you to the city for making all those proactive accommodations. With that, that's the end of item number 5. Item number 6, we can adjourn this meeting for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Oh. Like, wait.